I think white people are afraid of having an uncomfortable conversation like once in their life, whereas people of color are having uncomfortable conversations every single day.
It is important for allies and non-people of color. It's important, let me just be, transparent. It is important for white people to speak right now because it is those voices that have power. Black voices have been speaking on this issue. The Black Lives Matter movement is not new. It has been around for many years now. Civil rights is not new. Martin Luther King, Malcolm X is not new. Rosa Parks is not new. Civil unrest in our country is not new. Racism is not new. But what would be new is white people speaking on the issue. That would be something new. And that would be what we need to affect change, because it's white people who have the power.
What's going on now is something that has been happening in America since I've been alive, since my grandparents have been alive, my mom. And
we have literally been protesting since the moment we were brought to this country against our will.
And in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, white people were like, what are you guys going crazy about? Racism isn't really that bad. It's not a big deal. And then you fast forward to now, and it's literally the exact same thing and the exact same narrative, literally.
That it's important when having this conversation to have a historical context and understanding of the issues that have led us to where we are right now as a country.
And specifically, I think what's happening now is because of social media, because of cameras, phones, it's becoming more public.
And I've also realized that by being so far away, it's easy for me to kind of say, oh, it's like, it doesn't affect me, but it does. Like these things affect the whole world, but we don't always think about that.
It is very common for white people to take the perspective that, well, this isn't affecting me. And while I understand that, because it may not be, the effects may not be readily apparent, I do have to say that that statement is blatantly false, because we know that these policies, we know that these decisions, we know that these trends have a larger societal global impact, even if the repercussions are not immediately felt on the individual level.
Police brutality and police violence and state-sanctioned violence is an issue, and there is spillover, and there are people of other races who do get impacted. There are white people who do get assaulted by police officers and wrongly arrested or wrongly imprisoned and things like that. There are Latinos and Asians, etc., who do experience police brutality. They just experience it at a much lower rate than we do.
So even if we're not seeing the effects on an individual level, we have to know intellectually that it does affect us. And I think that's a great place to start. Let's take this, oh, it doesn't affect me, out of the equation, because it does. That's just an excuse that we use to make ourselves feel more comfortable about not doing anything.
The fact that the U.S. has been able to get away with oppressing its own people for so long contributes to its ability to oppress people outside of this country.
To quote Martin Luther King, like, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So just because it's happening in America doesn't mean it's not happening in the rest of the world. It just happens in many different ways, in many different forms, and that it's important that in the global community that we live in, we all care about issues that are happening across the world and contribute however we can, whether it's monetarily, whether it's just words of support, to know that the world is watching.
There's something major happening in one of the countries that I call home, and I don't understand it. And because of my identities, it's hard for me to understand it. But that's not an excuse not to.
The first thing that we need to do is focus on the point of the protest, focus on the fact that racism is systemic in this country and every country around the world, that prejudice exists in every society around the world, whether it be based on race, class, gender, sexuality, or otherwise, religion. Racism, isms exist everywhere, and let's focus on that.
For some people, they have the utmost freedom, the people who are white, the people who are wealthy, the people who are male, the people who are straight, the people who have all the privileges, like they have the most freedom. And then everybody else has these like varying degrees of freedom. And we really have to think about like, what does it mean for everybody to be free? And, you know, I think once we really start answering those questions, then we'll have to, and we decide that we want everybody to truly be free, then we'll have to completely overhaul our political and economic systems, because they don't facilitate freedom for everyone.
And so our continual work needs to be to undo that racism in ourselves and to educate ourselves, and not to think, oh, I read a couple books, I read White Fragility, and so now I'm an ally, like I did it, I'm not racist anymore. Like, personally, I feel like I have to continually work on this because I'm still benefiting from this system.
You know, obviously all oppression is connected. And when you liberate the people who are at the very bottom, you also liberate the people who are above them. You know, once you liberate Black women, you liberate women. Once you liberate Black trans people, you liberate trans people. Like once you liberate Black queer people, you liberate queer people. Once you liberate Black poor people, you liberate poor people.
It's crazy because we're going through this COVID period, which is a pandemic, but no one's talking about the police violence as a pandemic or as a public health issue.
The fact is that although white people or Caucasians are no longer the majority here in the United States, white people, non-Hispanic whites, non-Latinx whites, still represent the overwhelming majority of every single political institution in our country.
It's like not even that we're not just that we're only less than 20% of the population, but we're probably less than like 5% of politicians. We're less than 1% of CEOs. Like in all the places where having power really matters, we're just like not really represented there at all. We do not have the power in numbers. We do not have the power in terms of resources, in terms of money. We do not have the power to fix this by ourselves. The organization costs money and it costs time. And then on top of that, why the fuck should we have to organize when you have all these people who literally just have to sit down in a room and say, we're going to fix this, we're going to change it?
It just reeks of the privilege and dominance that a lot of white people have, whether it's individual white racism or, you know, I think now we're talking about the systemic racism that it bleeds into everything. When you talk about education, you talk about policing, you talk about housing, you talk about healthcare, you talk about any issue you name. I can probably give you a historical reference and statistics on the African American community in America and how those policies have a disparate impact on them.
It's like every system that exists that is problematic, whether it's the healthcare system, the education system, police violence, every system that we have that has problems, it impacts everyone, and then it impacts Black people, in a whole different way, like on another level.
We have to constantly unlearn things that we were taught, and we constantly have to learn the way that the racist institution, you know, is evolving.